The courthouse steps gleamed white under Boston's December sky. Not from marble wouldn't survive New England winters, but from snow that refused to melt despite the city's salt trucks working overtime. The white blanket covered everything like nature's attempt at temporary amnesia, hiding the cracks in the concrete, the cigarette butts, the dried gum stains. A pristine facade. Elena Reyes didn't look up as she climbed those steps. Her charcoal pantsuit and severe black coat formed a moving shadow against the blinding white. No scarf, no hat despite the bitter cold. The wind whipped strands of her dark hair across her face, but she made no move to brush them away. Reporters called her name. Camera shutters clicked like insect wings. She kept walking. Inside the courtroom was a study in beige and brown institutional colors, designed to evoke solemnity without personality. Elena sat in the last row, her posture perfect, spine refusing to touch the wooden bench behind her. Her eyes, dark and unreadable, focused on the small figure at the defendant's table. Noah Chen, 15 years old. His narrow shoulders slumped under a too large navy blazer, clearly borrowed. His hands with bitten nails rested on the table in front of him. Even from the back of the room, Elena could see they trembled slightly. The judge droned on about unauthorized access and computer fraud, words that could destroy a life before it truly began. Noah's attorney public defender, overworked, exhausted, made half-hearted motions. The prosecutor, crisp and confident, spoke of examples and deterrence. Elena watched as Noah's mother reached out once to touch her son's sleeve, then withdrew her hand when the bailiff frowned. The woman's face collapsed inward with a gesture like a building imploding in slow motion. Elena knew that face, had worn it herself. The side door opened with a whisper of air. Police Captain Marcus Hayes entered, tall and imposing in his dress uniform. The silver at his temples caught the fluorescent lights. His presence caused a ripple through the room, backs straightened, voices lowered, power leaving its invisible fingerprints on the air. Hayes spotted Elena. His expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. He walked directly toward her, each step measured and deliberate. The courtroom noise dimmed as people noticed. Even the judge paused mid-sentence. Hayes stopped in front of Elena. She didn't stand. "Congresswoman," he said, not a greeting, but an accusation. Elena said nothing. Her gaze remained on Noah. The slap came without warning, an open palm across her cheek, the sound cracking through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. Elena's head barely moved with the impact. A red mark bloomed on her brown skin. Gasps, a camera flash, the judge's gavel. Hayes leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "You don't belong here." Elena finally looked at him, her eyes clear and cold as winter glass. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that only he could hear. "Not yet." The words hung between them, simple and devastating. Not a threat, a promise. Hayes stepped back as if burned. The bailiff approached uncertainly, caught between authority figures. The judge called for order. Elena stood, smoothed her jacket, and walked out. She didn't look back at Hayes, didn't look at the reporters scrambling to follow, didn't look at Noah Chen, whose eyes had widened with something like recognition. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering her footprints almost as quickly as she made them. The apartment was silent when Elena returned. No greeting, no warmth, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a family heirloom she'd never had the heart to get rid of. Julian had loved that clock. She hung her coat precisely on its designated hook and removed her shoes, lining them up with military precision beside the door. The red mark on her cheek had faded to a dull pink. She didn't touch it. In the kitchen, she poured a glass of water, drank it standing up, then refilled it. The motions were automatic, a routine established through years of living alone. The apartment was minimalist, not from aesthetic choice, but from an inability to accumulate. Possessions meant attachments. Attachments meant vulnerability. Elena walked to her home office, a spare bedroom, converted into a workspace more functional than the one provided by Congress. She unlocked the bottom drawer of her desk with a small key she kept on a chain around her neck. Inside was a cedar box, the wood worn smooth from handling. The box contained Julian's things. Not all of them, most had been lost, misplaced by the system. But enough. His student ID card with a grinning 15-year-old face, a dog-eared copy of Crime and Punishment with his cramped notes in the margins, a Merit Scholar certificate, a half-finished letter to Princeton where he'd planned to study, and the police report. Elena unfolded it carefully along creases so deep they had begun to tear. The paper was yellow with age, the bureaucratic language faded but still legible. She knew every word by heart but read it anyway, a ritual of remembrance and punishment. Date November 17, 2005. Subject Reyes Julian Miguel Doe B. 04-12, 1988. Incident resisting administrative search reporting officer Hayes Marcus. The details were sparse, deliberately so. Julian had been walking home from the library. It was dark, nearly 8 p.m. Someone had reported a Latino male approximately 16-18 years of age, behaving suspiciously near a convenience store that had been robbed the previous week. Hayes had stopped Julian, asked for ID, asked what was in his backpack. Julian had complied, shown his school ID, opened his backpack to reveal books, asked why he was being stopped. That question, why, had been enough. Argumentative, Hayes had written. Subject displayed aggressive body language and refused to comply with further search. Elena closed her eyes, remembering Julian's phone call from the precinct, his voice shaking but trying to sound calm. They say I was resisting, but I wasn't, Elena. I swear I wasn't. The officer got angry when I asked questions. The report continued. Subject was transported to Boston PD South Station for processing. During routine questioning, subject became combative. Restraint was necessary. What the report didn't say, Julian's glasses had been broken in the restraint. His left wrist had been sprained. 2 ribs cracked. What the report didn't say, the holding cell camera had malfunctioned during the 6 hours Julian was there. What the report didn't say, when Elena, then a young legal aid attorney, had arrived to retrieve her brother, he'd been changed. Quieter. His eyes holding something new and terrible. The knowledge that his body, his person, his very existence could be criminalized at any moment. 3 weeks later, Julian had been found in the Charles River. The medical examiner ruled it suicide. No further investigation. Case closed. Elena folded the report and returned it to the box. Her hands didn't shake. They never did anymore. On her computer, she pulled up Noah Chen's file. 15 years old. 4.0 GPA. Coding prodigy. Found the school district's security flaws while working on a project. Reported them to his teacher, who reported him to the administration, who called the police instead of thanking him. Same pattern, different boy. Elena opened her encrypted email and typed a brief message. Dominic, I need everything on Noah Chen's case and the others you mentioned. It's time. Enamini. Inem. Bantino. She sent it, then leaned back in her chair. On her desk sat a framed photo of Julian in his debate team uniform, grinning with the confidence of someone who believes in systems and justice in a world that makes sense. I'm sorry it took so long, she whispered to the photograph, but I'm ready now. The clock in the hallway chimed 9 times. Outside her window, Boston continued to snow. The USB drive arrived 3 days later, delivered by courier to Elena's congressional office. No sender information, just her name printed on a plain white envelope. Her chief of staff, a young woman with perpetually worried eyes, placed it on her desk during their morning briefing. This came for you. No screening information. Elena nodded. It's expected. You can go. Alone, she plugged the drive into her personal laptop, never the government-issued one. A single folder appeared labeled simply 27. Inside were files. Each contained a name, an age, a photograph. All between 14 and 19 years old. Predominantly Black and Latino, with a few Asian American teenagers. All had been detained by Boston PD in the last 5 years. All had been processed for minor infractions or suspicions, and all had disappeared from the official system. No records of their arrests remained in the searchable databases. No mugshots, no fingerprints. As if they had never been processed at all. Attached was a brief note from Dominic. These are the ones I could find. They all follow the pattern. Detained, processed, then erased from the system within 48 hours. But the paper intake forms still exist in storage. Most interesting, they all have the same code on their paperwork. Nonviolent incident processing, special population. There are more, I'm still looking. Be careful. D. Elena opened each file methodically, memorizing faces, names, details. Noah Chen was among them. His intake photo showed him with reddened eyes and a defiant tilt to his chin that didn't quite mask his fear. just like Julian. At the bottom of the folder was one more document, a screenshot of an internal police department memo. New procedure, all juvenile processing involving classification SP-17 to be handled through alternate documentation protocol. No digital records to be maintained beyond 48 hours, unless charges formally filed. Paper records to be stored in Section C, accessible only to authorized personnel. Do not discuss this procedure with non-departmental personnel. The memo was signed by Robert Caldwell, Boston Police Commissioner. Elena sat back, mind racing. SP-17, Special Population 17, a classification system for certain types of detainees, a system designed to make them invisible. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, coffee, the place with the bad music and good pastries. 30 minutes. Sophia Wells. It had to be. Elena had reached out weeks ago, but hadn't expected a response. She locked her computer, told her staff she was taking a personal hour, and left the office. The January air hit her lungs like knives, but she welcomed the pain. It kept her sharp. The cafe was 3 blocks away, a small place with mismatched furniture and questionable acoustic taste. Elena chose a table in the back corner, her back to the wall facing the door. Old habits. Sophia arrived precisely on time. She was shorter than Elena remembered, with close-cropped hair now dyed a deep purple. Her eyes swept the room with the practiced caution of someone accustomed to being watched. "Congresswoman," she said, sliding into the seat opposite Elena. "Ms. Wells? Just Sophia, please. I'm not exactly in formal settings these days." A barista approached. They both ordered black coffee. When he left, Sophia leaned forward. "I assume you found something or you wouldn't have contacted me." Elena nodded. 27 cases so far, juveniles processed and then erased from the system, all tagged with the same code. SP-17, Sophia said quietly. Elena's eyes narrowed. "You know about it." "I helped build it." Sophia's hands wrapped around her coffee mug, knuckles whitening. "Or at least I helped build the data management system it uses. I didn't know what it was for. Not then." "When did you find out?" "6 months before I left. I was reviewing analytics looking at processing patterns. I noticed these statistical anomalies detentions that appeared in initial reports, but vanished from later ones. When I flagged it, my supervisor told me it was a data migration error. I believed him." Sophia's laugh was bitter. "Then I got assigned to a special project, developing an algorithm to help identify at-risk youth before they committed crimes. Predictive policing for minors. The data set I was given to work with had been sanitized, but I found the original sources. The patterns were clear. Black teens were 5 times more likely to be flagged. Latino kids 4 times. Asian Americans involved in certain activities, hacking, protesting, almost 3 times. And when you raise concerns?" Elena asked, already knowing the answer. "I was removed from the project. My access was revoked. A month later, I found out they'd implemented my early version, the biased one, without the corrections I'd proposed." Sophia took a sip of her coffee, grimacing at the taste. "That's when I started looking deeper. Found SP-17. Found what happened to kids who got that designation. They didn't just disappear from the system, they were subjected to enhanced processing, meaning longer holds, psychological tactics, intimidation, no phone calls for the first 6 hours, no lawyers present during preliminary questioning." Sophia made air quotes with her fingers. "All technically legal because they weren't formally charged, just being processed." Elena's mind flashed to Julian. 6 hours alone. No call until afterward. His voice shaking on the phone. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. Sophia glanced around the cafe before answering. "Because they're expanding it. The program is being evaluated by 3 other major cities. They're calling it Community Safety Initiative now. Pretty name for an ugly thing." She pulled out her phone, opened a note-taking app, and slid it across the table. "These are the people you need to talk to. People who know pieces of the puzzle." 4 names. Dominic Wells already contacted Rachel Green. Gabriel Torres, Noah Chen. Current case. Elena memorized the names, then nodded. Sophia took her phone back. "Why should I trust you?" Elena asked. Sophia's smile was sad. "You shouldn't. You shouldn't trust anyone. But I'm guessing you learned that lesson 20 years ago." They finished their coffee in silence. As they prepared to leave, Sophia said, "They'll come after you, you know. If you pull this thread." Elena stood straightening her jacket. "I'm counting on it." Outside, the snow had stopped, but the sky hung low and gray, promising more to come. Elena walked back to her office, her mind categorizing, planning, assembling pieces of a puzzle 20 years in the making. In her pocket, her phone buzzed again. Another text from Sophia PS. "If you're wondering why I care so much, I had a brother too. Different system, same result. Good luck, Congresswoman." Elena deleted the message, but her step lightened almost imperceptibly. She wasn't alone anymore. Elena's apartment transformed over the following weeks. The pristine, minimalist space gradually filled with evidence of obsession. Walls once bare now held maps of Boston marked with detention locations. Color-coded sticky notes tracked patterns of arrests, detentions, and the mysterious processing that left no digital footprint. She'd taken leave from her congressional duties, citing family matters. Not entirely a lie. Tonight she sat at her dining table with the team Sophia had suggested, an unlikely alliance bound by shared wounds and determination. Dominic Wells, Sophia's brother, nursed a cup of tea, his lanky frame hunched over a stack of paper records. At 32, he looked older, his receding hairline and wire-rimmed glasses giving him the appearance of a much older civil servant. 10 years in the records department had left their mark in his perpetually curved shoulders and ink-stained fingers. "These are all I could smuggle out," he said, gesturing to the papers. "Intake forms from the last 2 years, all with the SP-17 designation." Rachel Green sat opposite him, her laptop open, fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. At 29, she was the youngest of the group, with bright eyes that belied the shadows beneath them. Her cybersecurity expertise had been crucial in establishing secure communications for their clandestine meetings. "I've been mapping their system architecture," she said without looking up. "The firewall has vulnerabilities, but getting in without leaving tracks will take time." Gabriel Torres stood by the window, keeping watch out of habit rather than necessity. At 53, the former internal affairs investigator carried himself with the rigid posture of a man who had spent decades in law enforcement. His dark hair had gone almost completely gray, and deep lines etched his face. He'd been the hardest to convince, the most reluctant to believe the system he'd dedicated his life to could be so fundamentally corrupt. "Commissioner Caldwell is careful," Torres said, his voice low and gravelly. "Never puts anything incriminating in writing, always maintains plausible deniability." Elena nodded. "That's why we need more than paper records. We need testimonies, patterns, proof that can't be explained away." She spread out photographs of the 27 teenagers identified so far. "What connects these cases? Besides their racial backgrounds?" Dominic adjusted his glasses. "Many were detained for suspicious behavior or matching the description of suspects in unrelated cases. Minor infractions that escalated when they questioned why they were being stopped." "Just like Julian," Elena murmured. Rachel looked up from her computer. "I've been running analytics on arrest reports that do make it into the system. There's something else: language. Certain keywords appear disproportionately in reports involving minority juveniles. Aggressive, non-compliant, threatening posture. Dehumanizing language," Torres said. "Makes it easier to justify harsh treatment." "There's more," Rachel continued. "I found references to an AI system they're implementing, PRISM, Predictive Risk Identification and Safety Management. It flags individuals based on dozens of factors, including school records, social media activity, neighborhood, and—" She paused, looking directly at Elena. "Language spoken at home." Elena's breath caught. "They're flagging Spanish-speaking households?" Rachel nodded. "Not explicitly, but the algorithm gives higher risk scores to individuals with limited English proficiency in home environment." The room fell silent as the implication sank in. "We need access to that algorithm," Elena said finally, "and to the back-end data, the cases that never make it into public records." Torres shook his head. "That's stored on secure servers. You'd need someone with high-level clearance. Or someone who can break in," Rachel suggested. Elena considered this. "No, breaking in gives them an excuse to discredit everything we find. We need to do this legally." "That could take years," Dominic protested. "Then years it will be," Elena replied, her voice hardening. "I've waited 2 decades already. I won't risk justice for speed." She turned to Torres. You still have contacts in the department, friends who might have doubts about what they're seeing? Torres hesitated. Fewer than you might think. But there's someone, a detective who worked my daughter's case. He was troubled by how it was handled. Elena nodded. Contact him. Carefully. To Rachel. Keep mapping their systems. Look for legal access points. Public records requests we can leverage. To Dominic. Keep gathering paper records. Focus on the juveniles who were processed multiple times. They continued working deep into the night, piecing together fragments of a system designed to remain invisible. Around midnight, Dominic discovered something. Look at this, he said, laying out 3 intake forms. Noah Chen, processed 3 weeks ago for unauthorized computer access, but he was also brought in twice before, once for loitering near a protest, once for suspicious activity when he was sketching the police station for an art project. Elena examined the forms. 3 strikes. They're building files on these kids, creating patterns, setting them up to fail, Torres added grimly. As the team prepared to leave, Elena stopped them at the door. One more thing. Noah Chen's hearing is tomorrow. I'll be there. The rest of you stay away. We can't risk you being identified yet. Rachel frowned. Why go yourself? You're the most visible. Because someone needs to witness, Elena replied simply. Someone needs to see and remember. That's how this started, and that's how it continues. After they left, Elena returned to her dining room. Julian's photo watched her from the sideboard. She picked it up, wiping a thin layer of dust from the glass. I found them, Julian, she whispered. The others like you. We're going to make them see you all. She placed the photo in the center of her evidence wall, the heart around which everything else revolved. The following week brought 2 developments. Noah Chen was sentenced to 6 months probation and 200 hours of community service, a lighter sentence than expected, but still a mark that would follow him. And Rachel missed their scheduled meeting. Elena noticed immediately. Rachel was never late. The group waited 30 minutes before beginning without her. Has anyone heard from her? Elena asked. Dominic and Torres shook their heads. I'll try calling again. Dominic offered, stepping into the hallway with his phone. Torres leaned closer to Elena. Could she have been compromised? Possibly, or she could have a legitimate emergency. We should prepare for the worst, Torres said, his law enforcement instincts surfacing. Dominic returned, his expression troubled. No answer, but I checked our secure message channel. She left a note saying she needed to handle a family issue and would be out of contact for a few days. That's not like her, Elena said. She would have told us directly. The meeting continued, but with a new undercurrent of tension. They reviewed Noah Chen's case, discussed approaches for contacting other juveniles on their list, and planned their next steps carefully. 2 days later, Elena received an encrypted message from an anonymous source. Check your system. You've been compromised. Our installed monitoring software during last meeting. Police have your communications. Move locations immediately. Destroy electronic devices. Friend. Elena acted swiftly. She contacted Torres and Dominic through their emergency protocol burner phones purchased with cash. They relocated their materials to a safe house Torres had maintained since his days in internal affairs. Computers were wiped and abandoned. I can't believe Rachel would do this, Dominic said as they settled into the sparse apartment across town. She was committed, passionate. Everyone has pressure points, Torres replied grimly. Family, friends, career. The department knows how to squeeze. Elena remained silent, methodically rebuilding their evidence wall in the new location. Her movements were precise, controlled, betraying no emotion. But inside, disappointment burned like acid. Another person she'd trusted, another mistake. The next day, surveillance photos arrived in a manila envelope slipped under the safe house door. Photos of Rachel entering Boston Police Headquarters, meeting with Captain Hayes, accepting what appeared to be an envelope of cash. I took these myself, Torres said, spreading them on the table. Wanted to be sure. Dominic stared at the images, his face pale. What do we do now? We've lost our technical expert. Our systems are compromised. We adapt. Elena said, her voice steady. This changes our approach, not our objective. She pinned Rachel's photo to their evidence board next to Captain Hayes. Another connection, another piece of the puzzle. That evening, as Elena worked alone at the safe house, the burner phone rang. Unknown number. Elena, it's Rachel. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. You have 60 seconds to explain before I hang up. I didn't betray you. Not really. Rachel's voice was urgent, hushed. They approached me 2 weeks ago, threatened my sister's scholarship, said they'd find drug residue in her dorm room if I didn't cooperate. So you chose to save her by betraying us? No. I chose to play along while planting something of my own. A pause. I did install monitoring software on your systems, but it wasn't just sending data out, it was creating a backdoor in. Elena remained silent, skeptical. I needed them to trust me, Rachel continued, to give me access to their systems. The software I installed creates a two-way connection. Yes, they can see some of what you were doing. Carefully selected information I wanted them to see, but now I can also access their internal network. Prove it. Check your email. The account we set up for emergencies. I've sent you something. Elena opened her laptop and navigated to the secure email account. A new message contained a single file, a screenshot of Prism's interface showing risk scores for juveniles across Boston. Noah Chen's name was highlighted, his risk score artificially elevated by multiple factors including foreign language proficiency and technology aptitude. This is just the beginning, Rachel said. I'm copying everything I can access, the AI's code, the risk factor weightings, the overrides manually entered by officers. Elena studied the screenshot. If genuine, it was more than they'd managed to gather in weeks of investigation. Why should I believe this isn't another trap? Because I'm risking everything, Rachel replied, her voice breaking slightly. If they discover what I'm doing, it won't just be my sister who suffers. I've committed multiple federal crimes now. Elena considered. The Rachel she knew was brilliant but cautious. This plan playing double agent was reckless, dangerous. Perhaps that made it credible. Keep going, Elena said finally, but we'll verify everything independently. And Rachel, if this is another deception, there won't be anywhere safe for you. I understand. Rachel paused. There's something else. They're planning to expand the program next month, implementing PRISM in 3 more cities. They're calling it a pilot success based on reduced juvenile crime statistics. Statistics they manipulated by erasing records. Exactly, I have to go. I'll contact you through the emergency channel only. The line went dead. Elena sat motionless, weighing possibilities, calculating risks. Finally, she called Torres and Dominic. Rachel reached out, she told them, explaining the situation. It could be genuine. It could be another layer of deception. What's your instinct? Torres asked. Elena thought of Julian, of Noah, of the 27 faces on their wall. My instinct is that we need that data regardless of its source. We proceed as if Rachel is still compromised, but we use whatever information she provides after verifying it. And if it's a trap, Dominic asked, then we spring it on our terms. Elena's voice hardened. They think they're hunting us. They don't realize we've been hunting them all along. The next morning, an unmarked envelope arrived containing a USB drive. On it was the complete code base for PRISM, including the weighted factors used to generate risk scores. Elena and Dominic spent hours analyzing it, confirming their worst suspicions. The algorithm was explicitly designed to flag minority juveniles. Factors like non-English primary household language carried 5 times the weight of actual criminal history. Living in certain neighborhoods automatically added points to the risk score. Even academic excellence in STEM fields like Noah Chen's programming skills was considered a risk factor for potential cyber activities. This is it, Dominic whispered, staring at the code. Systemic racism encoded into software, hidden behind technical language and statistical models. Elena nodded, a cold satisfaction settling in her chest. Not joy, she was beyond that, but the grim determination of someone who had finally found their target. Now we need to prove who authorized it, she said, who designed the classifications, who approved targeting children based on their race or language. Torres, who had been silently reviewing the data, spoke up. This goes beyond Hayes, beyond even Caldwell. This has federal funding, oversight from multiple agencies. Then we'll take them all down, Elena said simply. She stood at their evidence wall, now expanded to cover 2 full sides of the safe house living room. Faces, documents, connections mapped in red string. At the center, always Julian's photograph. Rachel's next task is to find the authorization chain. Every signature, every approval, every person who knew what this system really does. Outside Boston's winter deepened snow piling in dirty heaps along the sidewalks. But inside the safe house, something else was building momentum. The slow, inexorable force of truth preparing to break through decades of silence. The attack came 3 weeks later, just as they were making real progress. Elena was leaving a congressional committee meeting when her phone buzzed with news alerts. Congresswoman Elena Reyes under investigation for cyber attack on federal systems. Sources claim Reyes accessed classified law enforcement data. Justice Department launches probe into alleged hack of police databases. She kept walking her pace steady, despite the reporters now calling her name, shoving microphones toward her face. Her security detail closed ranks around her, guiding her to the waiting car. Inside, she read the full stories. Anonymous sources claimed Elena had orchestrated a sophisticated hack of law enforcement databases, accessing classified information about ongoing investigations. The alleged motive undermining police operations targeting gang activity in Latino communities. The narrative was perfectly crafted to alienate potential allies. Liberals would question her methods. Conservatives would condemn her apparent opposition to law enforcement. The implication was clear. Elena Reyes was not fighting corruption, but engaging in ethnic favoritism, perhaps even criminal conspiracy. By the time she reached her apartment, her chief of staff had called 7 times. Voice messages from colleagues expressed concern, confusion, carefully worded distance. The political isolation had begun. Elena ignored them all and headed straight to the safe house. Torres and Dominic were already there, faces grim as they watched the news coverage. Caldwell held a press conference an hour ago, Torres said, gesturing to the muted television. Full denial of any profiling system. Says you fabricated evidence to undermine legitimate police work. On screen, Commissioner Robert Caldwell stood at a podium, the very picture of dignified concern. His silver hair and tailored uniform projected authority and trustworthiness. Beside him stood Captain Hayes, solemn and supportive. Elena unmuted the television. Deeply troubled by these allegations, Caldwell was saying, his deep voice resonant with practiced sincerity. The Boston Police Department has always been committed to fair and equal application of the law. These accusations of systemic bias are not only false, but damaging to the dedicated officers who risk their lives daily to protect all our citizens, regardless of background. A reporter called out, "What about the PRISM system Congresswoman Reyes has alleged exists?" Caldwell's expression conveyed perfect pain patience. There is no profiling system. We do utilize modern data analytics to help deploy our limited resources effectively, as do most major departments. But the suggestion that we target juveniles based on race or ethnicity is categorically false and frankly offensive. Another question: has the Congresswoman accessed police databases illegally? That's currently under investigation. I wouldn't want to prejudice that process with speculation. But I will say that any unauthorized access to law enforcement systems represents a serious breach of security and potentially endangers both officers and the public. Elena muted the television again. They're getting ahead of us, controlling the narrative. Torres nodded grimly. Standard procedure. Discredit the accuser. Muddy the waters. What about Rachel? Dominic asked. Could she have been exposed? As if in answer, Elena's secure phone chimed with a message. They know. Not about me specifically, but they know systems were breached. Implementing security protocols. Limited access now. Will send what I have tonight. Maybe last communication. Elena showed the message to the others. We need to accelerate our timeline. Once they lock down their systems completely, we lose our window. But the investigation into you, Dominic began, is a distraction, Elena finished, designed to keep us defensive, responding instead of acting. She moved to their evidence wall, studying the connections they'd mapped. We need to shift the focus back to them, back to the children they've targeted. How? Torres asked. The media's already running with their version. Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, Noah Chen. The hacker kid, Dominic asked. Yes, and the other juveniles we've identified. We need their stories, their testimonies. Elena turned to face them. The system is designed to make these children invisible. We make them visible again. She began pulling photographs from the wall. Dominic, contact as many families as you can. Explain what we're doing. Ask if they'll speak out. Most won't, Torres warned. They're afraid. The system has already threatened them once. Some will, Elena countered. Some are just waiting for someone to listen. She worked through the night drafting statements, preparing evidence packages, mapping out a counter-strategy. When dawn broke, she had a plan. While Commissioner Caldwell and Captain Hayes were focusing on the alleged cyber attack, Elena would shift the battlefield entirely. Not a technical argument about database access, but human stories. Children traumatized by a system meant to protect them. Her first call was to Noah Chen's mother. Mrs. Chen, my name is Elena Reyes. I'd like to talk to you about what happened to your son. There was a long pause on the line. Then quietly, the lawyer said we shouldn't talk to anyone, that it would violate Noah's probation. I understand, but they're using that fear to silence you, to silence Noah. Elena kept her voice gentle but firm. What happened to your son has happened to dozens of others. It will happen to hundreds more if nothing changes. Another silence. Then, Noah hasn't been the same since. He doesn't sleep, jumps when the doorbell rings. His teachers say he's stopped participating in class. Post-traumatic stress, Elena said. I've seen it before. My brother. She stopped, surprised by the catch in her voice. She never spoke of Julian to strangers. My brother experienced something similar. The system changed him. What are you asking us to do? Tell your story, on record, with other families who've been through the same thing. Mrs. Chen's voice hardened slightly. And put my son at risk again. They've already threatened to revoke his probation if he talks about what happened. I know I'm asking something difficult, Elena acknowledged, but staying silent, it's what they count on. It's how they keep the system running. A long pause, then, I'll talk to Noah. It has to be his decision. By midday, Elena had spoken with 12 families. 5 agreed immediately. 4 refused outright. 3, like the Chens, needed time to consider. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. That evening, as promised, a final data package arrived from Rachel. Hundreds of files documenting the development, implementation, and operation of PRISM. Emails between department heads discussing the cleanup of juvenile records. Budget allocations for the program, disguised under innocuous headings. And most damning, a recorded video conference between Commissioner Caldwell, Captain Hayes, and representatives from 2 federal agencies discussing the statistical advantages of the system. The beauty of this approach, Caldwell said in the recording, is that it gives us the results we need without the political complications of traditional enforcement patterns. Hayes nodded on screen. We're not handling these kids differently because of who they are. We're responding to risk factors that correlate with certain populations. It's science, not bias. A federal official responded, the distinction may seem academic to critics. Caldwell's smile was cold. That's why there are no records for critics to find. We're not processing these populations. We're processing statistics. Elena watched the video 3 times, her expression unchanging. But inside, something shifted. Not rage, she'd moved beyond rage years ago. Something colder, more focused. The absolute certainty that she was looking at the men who had created the system that killed her brother. Not with a baton or a gun, but with policy, with algorithms, with deliberate, calculating indifference. We have them, Torres said quietly, watching over her shoulder. This is what we needed. Elena nodded. Download everything. Multiple copies. Secure locations. She turned to Dominic. How many families do we have willing to speak? 7 confirmed, maybe 3 more. It's enough to start. Elena stood. Tomorrow we take this public, all of it. They'll come after you with everything they have, Torres warned. Career, reputation, possibly criminal charges. Let them try, Elena's voice was steel. I've been preparing for this fight since I was 18 years old. That night alone in her apartment, Elena took out Julian's box one last time. Among his possessions was a journal she'd rarely allowed herself to read. His private thoughts were too painful, too raw. But tonight she opened it to the last entry dated 3 days before his death. Elena keeps saying it will get better, that what happened isn't who I am, that I can still be the person I was planning to be. But I don't think she understands. When they put their hands on you, when they look at you like you're nothing, it stays with you. It changes how you see yourself. I don't know how to be that other Julian anymore. The one who believed the world made sense. Elena closed the journal, tears falling silently. I understand now, Julian, she whispered. And tomorrow they will too. Outside her window, the first light of dawn began to break over Boston. The beginning of a day 20 years in the making. Morning arrived with the relentless precision of a ticking bomb. Elena stood at the window of the safe house, watching Boston come alive beneath a steel-gray sky. Street lamps flickered off. Delivery trucks rumbled past. Early commuters hunched against the February chill faces, buried in scarves, thoughts already at their destinations. None of them knew what was coming. Behind her, Dominic sorted through testimonies they'd gathered overnight. 7 families had committed to speaking publicly about their children's experiences with the Boston PD. 7 stories of detentions that left no digital trace but permanent psychological scars. The Chen boy confirmed, Dominic said, looking up from his phone. His mother says he wants to talk. Elena nodded but didn't turn from the window. Schedule him last, after the others have created context. Torres entered carrying coffee and a newspaper. His expression was grim. They've escalated, he said, laying the paper on the table. The headline blazed across the front page, Rep. Reyes linked to activist hacking group. Elena scanned the article. Anonymous sources claimed she had connections to a cyber-terrorist organization targeting law enforcement nationwide. The evidence payments from her campaign fund to a digital security consultant who had previously been questioned regarding hacks of government databases. Rachel. They were using Rachel's legitimate work for Elena's campaign as evidence of conspiracy. They're getting desperate, Elena observed, her voice cool, moving from implication to fabrication. It's effective, Torres warned. 3 congressional colleagues have already called for you to step down pending investigation. Let them. Elena finally turned from the window. In 6 hours, their narrative collapses. She moved to the center of the room where their equipment was arranged: cameras, microphones, secure laptops. Everything needed for the live stream they'd planned. No press conference, no media filter, direct testimony from the families accompanied by the evidence they'd gathered. Status, she asked Rachel, who had arrived an hour earlier, dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she hadn't slept in days. Secure channel established. Backup streams ready in case they try to block the main one. Rachel's fingers moved across her keyboard, checking connections. But there's something else. They're implementing emergency security protocols on all BPD systems. Complete lockdown by noon. Then we move earlier, Elena decided. 9 a.m. instead of 11. Call the families. Make sure they're ready. The team moved with practiced efficiency, the result of weeks working together. Dominic confirming participants, Torres handling physical security, Rachel preparing the technical setup. Elena retreated to a small side room they'd converted into a makeshift office. On the desk lay printed copies of the most damning evidence: the PRISM algorithm specifications, the video conference, transcript, the list of juveniles processed under SP-17 protocol. Beside them, a single photograph of Julian. She touched it briefly, then began reviewing her opening statement one final time. The words had been revised dozens of times, each version honed to strike the perfect balance between personal and professional, emotional and factual. This would be her only chance to frame the narrative before the evidence and testimonies took center stage. A soft knock at the door. Torres entered without waiting for response. Final security sweep is complete, he reported. Perimeter is clear. No surveillance detected. Elena nodded. And the contingency plans? In place. If this location is compromised, everyone has their assigned exit routes and rendezvous points. Torres hesitated. There's something else. My contact in the department sent a warning. Hayes has mobilized his special response team. Not officially, but they're on standby. For what purpose? Unknown, but they're the same unit that handles high-risk warrants. Tactical entries. Elena absorbed this, her expression unchanged. They wouldn't risk a raid on a sitting congresswoman without federal approval, and the feds won't move that quickly even with Caldwell's connections. Hayes might, Torres said quietly. He has personal stake in keeping you silent. Elena considered this. Increased security measures. No one enters or leaves without verification. And make sure our backup live stream locations are ready. Torres nodded and left. Elena returned to her statement, but her mind kept calculating risks, contingencies, weak points in their plan. Hayes was dangerous not just because of his position, but because of his personal involvement. 20 years ago, he had been the one to detain Julian, to process him, to break something inside a 17-year-old boy that could never be repaired. If Hayes was mobilizing resources off the books, it meant he felt cornered, desperate, good. At 8:30 a.m., the first families arrived, parents with tight expressions and watchful eyes, teenagers who looked simultaneously too young and too old childhood, stolen by encounters that had taught them their bodies, their very existence could be criminalized at any moment. Elena greeted each one personally, thanking them for their courage. Some she knew only from case files and testimonies. Others she had spoken with multiple times over the past weeks, building trust, explaining the importance of their stories. A mother gripped Elena's hand, tears in her eyes. My son hasn't spoken above a whisper since they released him. 3 months now. Elena held the woman's gaze. Today you speak for him and for all the others who can't. At 8:55, they gathered in the main room. Cameras were positioned to protect identities when requested. Microphones tested. Evidence organized for presentation. Rachel counted down from her position at the technical controls. Live in 5, 4, 3. A red light blinked on. The live stream began. Elena faced the camera, her posture straight, her eyes clear and direct. My name is Elena Reyes. I represent Massachusetts' 7th Congressional District, but I am not speaking to you today as a congresswoman. I am speaking as a sister, a daughter, a member of a community that has been systematically targeted, traumatized, and silenced by those sworn to protect it. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. 20 years ago, my brother Julian was detained by the Boston Police Department. He was 17 years old, a merit scholar, a debate team captain, walking home from the library with a copy of Crime and Punishment in his backpack. His crime looking like someone who might have committed a crime. Elena maintained perfect composure, but her voice carried the depth of 2 decades of grief. 6 hours later, when I was finally allowed to see him, something had changed. Something fundamental had broken inside him. 3 weeks later, he was gone. His death was ruled a suicide. The case quickly closed. She leaned slightly forward. I have spent 20 years seeking answers, not just for Julian, but for all the others like him. Children predominantly Black, Latino, and Asian American detained, processed, and traumatized through a system specifically designed to target them while leaving no trace of its methods. Elena gestured to a screen beside her, where the PRISM interface appeared. This is PRISM, Predictive Risk Identification and Safety Management, an algorithm used by the Boston Police Department to identify high-risk juveniles. What determines risk? Not criminal history, not actual behavior, but factors including race, neighborhood language spoken at home, and even academic interests. She displayed the code highlighting the weighted factors. A Latino teenager receives 5 times the risk score of a white teenager with identical behavior. A child from a Spanish-speaking household is automatically flagged for enhanced scrutiny. Excellence in computer science, like 15-year-old Noah Chen's coding abilities, is considered suspicious rather than admirable. Elena's voice hardened. But PRISM is only part of the system. What happens to these children after they are detained is equally disturbing. They are processed under a special classification, SP-17. Their records are maintained only on paper, deleted from digital systems within 48 hours. They essentially disappear, making patterns of targeting impossible to detect through normal oversight. She paused again. You don't have to take my word for any of this. Today you will hear directly from the families affected. You will see the evidence we have gathered: internal communications, algorithm specifications, and testimony from those within the system who can no longer remain silent. Elena looked directly into the camera, her gaze unwavering. To Commissioner Caldwell, Captain Hayes, and all those who have participated in and profited from this system, your silence ends today. She stepped aside, making way for the first family to tell their story. For the next 2 hours, testimonies flowed. Parents described children who returned from detention, changed, anxious, withdrawn, afraid of authority figures. Teenagers spoke haltingly of hours spent in interrogation rooms without legal representation, of threats and psychological tactics of being made to feel criminal for simply existing in their skin. Between testimonies, Elena and her team presented evidence, the recorded meeting where Caldwell spoke of processing statistics, not populations, emails discussing the need to sanitize juvenile processing data, the manual for SP-17 classification with its explicit focus on minority youths. Viewership of the live stream climbed steadily. Social media erupted. News outlets began carrying portions live, unable to ignore the magnitude of what was being revealed. Then Noah Chen took the seat in front of the camera. At 15, he looked both younger and older than his age. Slight frame, oversized glasses, eyes that had seen too much. I found a security flaw in our school district's database. He began, his voice quiet but steady. Students' personal information was basically public. Anyone could access it. I reported it to my teacher, showed her how to fix it. She told the principal. Noah adjusted his glasses, a nervous gesture. 2 days later, police came to my house. Said I had committed unauthorized access of a protected system. They took my laptop, my phone. Took me to the station. He paused, swallowing hard. They put me in a room alone. No camera. Officer told me they'd found other activities on my devices. Said I could be charged with multiple felonies. Said I'd go to juvenile detention until I was 18, then adult prison after that. Noah's mother placed a hand on his shoulder, supporting him as he continued. I kept asking for my parents for a lawyer. They said I wasn't under arrest, just being processed, so I didn't get a phone call yet. One officer, his voice caught. One officer said kids like me think we're smarter than everyone else, that they had ways to handle that. Elena watched from behind the camera, her face impassive, but her heart racing. Noah's story echoed Julian's with eerie precision. The same tactics, the same threats, the same deliberate trauma. 6 hours, Noah continued. 6 hours before they let me call home. By then, I'd signed a statement. I don't even remember what it said. I just wanted to go home. As Noah finished his testimony, Rachel signaled urgently from her station. Elena moved to her side. We have a problem, Rachel whispered. They've traced the stream. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north. Elena's mind raced through options. They'd anticipated this possibility, prepared for it. But not so soon. How long, she asked. Minutes. 5 at most. Elena nodded once decisions made. Implement Protocol 3. Get the families out first. Southeast exit. She returned to the front of the room, her expression betraying nothing of the urgency she felt. Thank you, Noah, she said calmly. Your courage today will help ensure other children don't experience what you did. She turned to address the entire group. We're going to take a brief pause in our presentation. For security reasons, we need to relocate. The stream will resume in approximately 30 minutes. Confusion rippled through the room, but Torres was already moving, guiding families toward the prepared exit route. Dominic gathered evidence materials, loading them into pre-packed cases. Elena approached Noah and his mother. There may be police coming, not to arrest anyone, they wouldn't risk that publicly, but to disrupt this testimony. We have a secure route for you to leave. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened with fear, but Noah stood straighter. Are you leaving too? He asked Elena. Shortly. There are a few things I need to finish first. Noah studied her face. They'll come after you. Because of us. Because of this. Elena allowed herself a small, genuine smile. They've been coming after me for 20 years, Noah. I'm still here. As the Chens left with Torres, Elena returned to Rachel's station. Status. Multiple vehicles confirmed. Police and unmarked. Approaching from 2 directions now. Yarm. Time remaining. 3 minutes, maybe less. Elena nodded. Continue the stream. I'll handle this next part alone. Rachel hesitated. The contingency plan was to change of plans. Elena interrupted. Get yourself and the equipment out. Secondary location. I'll meet you there. Rachel wanted to argue, but recognized the steel in Elena's voice. She nodded once, gathering her essential equipment. Elena returned to the center of the now emptying room. Only she and Dominic remained. You should go, she told him. Dominic shook his head. Not without you. I need you to ensure the evidence reaches the secondary location, and I need someone they don't expect to be here. Understanding dawned in his eyes. You're staying deliberately. Not for long, just long enough. Dominic looked uncertain but finally nodded. Be careful. Hayes isn't rational where you're concerned. After he left, Elena faced the still-running camera. Alone now, she allowed a hint of her true feelings to show not fear, but a cold, focused determination. For those still watching, I apologize for the interruption. It appears the Boston Police Department has located our broadcast facility and is en route to shut us down. Their urgency tells you everything you need to know about the truth of what we've revealed today. She leaned closer to the camera. Even if this stream ends, the evidence will not disappear. Unlike the children they've targeted, our documentation cannot be erased with a keystroke or buried in a filing cabinet. It has already been distributed to multiple news organizations, legal advocacy groups, and congressional oversight committees. Outside, the sound of vehicles arriving, doors slamming, voices calling orders. Elena continued unhurried. To those who have maintained this system of targeted harassment and trauma, your time of operating in shadows is over. The spotlight will not dim. The questions will not cease. The voices you have silenced are finding their strength again. A pounding at the door. Boston police, open up. Elena smiled slightly, still looking into the camera. It seems our conversation must end for now, but not forever. Never again forever. The door burst open. Captain Hayes entered first, uniform, crisp face flushed with anger or exertion. Behind him, officers in tactical gear spread through the room. Hayes stopped short when he saw Elena sitting calmly facing the camera. Turn that off, he ordered. Elena made no move to comply. This is a private broadcast on private property, Captain. Do you have a warrant? We received reports of criminal activity at this address. Hayes signaled to an officer who moved to the camera. Terminate the stream, now. The officer hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the optics of the situation. Armed police shutting down a congressional representative's broadcast. Elena used his hesitation. Before you end this stream, Captain Hayes, perhaps you'd like to explain to our viewers why the Boston Police Department mobilized a tactical team to silence testimony from families your department has traumatized. Hayes stepped forward, looming over her. This isn't about families. This is about you illegally accessing confidential police systems, compromising ongoing investigations, endangering officers. Is that what you told Julian too? That his questions were endangering you? Elena's voice remained steady, but something dangerous flashed in her eyes. Before you put him in that room for 6 hours? Before you broke him? Hayes's face hardened. To the hesitating officer, cut the feed. Now! This time the officer complied. The red light on the camera died. Elena stood gathering her coat with deliberate movements. Was it worth it, Marcus, 20 years of covering up what you did to a 17-year-old boy? I didn't do anything to your brother that wasn't procedure, Hayes growled. Procedure, Elena repeated the word like ice in her mouth. Yes, that's exactly what we've been exposing today. The procedure that targets children based on their race, that traumatizes them deliberately, that erases records to hide patterns. She stepped closer to him, unintimidated by his physical presence or the officers surrounding them. Julian was just the beginning. How many others have you broken since then? How many Noah Chens? How many children who will never trust authority again, who will never feel safe in their own skin? Hayes's expression flickered, not guilt, Elena realized, but annoyance at being questioned. You have no idea what it takes to maintain order in this city, he said. The difficult decisions, the necessary measures. Necessary, Elena echoed. Is that how you justify it to yourself? Necessary to detain children who've committed no crime? Necessary to isolate them for hours without representation? Necessary to threaten them until they break? Hayes signaled to his officers. We're done here. Congresswoman Reyes, you're not under arrest at this time, but you will need to come with us to answer questions regarding potential criminal activities. Elena smiled thinly. I don't think so, Captain. Unless you're prepared to arrest a sitting member of Congress without a warrant or charges, I'll be leaving now. My legal team is already aware of my location in this encounter. She walked past him toward the door. Hayes grabbed her arm, fingers digging into her bicep. This isn't over, he hissed. Elena looked pointedly at his hand until he released her. No, she agreed. It's only beginning. Outside news vans had already arrived, drawn by social media reports of police converging on the location of the explosive livestream. Cameras turned toward Elena as she emerged. Reporters called questions. She paused on the steps, allowing them to capture her image composed unbroken, walking away from a building now filled with police officers who had come to silence her. The visual was worth 1,000 testimonies. The secondary location was a converted warehouse in South Boston, owned through a shell company controlled by Torres. The team reconvened there 3 hours later after ensuring they weren't followed. The stream reached over 2 million viewers before it was cut. Rachel reported her laptop displaying analytics. And it's been mirrored, shared, downloaded. They can't contain it now. Elena nodded, surveying their hastily reassembled operation. The evidence wall had been recreated, workstations established. The families had been escorted to safe locations, their testimonies secured. News coverage, she asked. Dominic gestured to the multiple screens they'd set up, each showing a different network. It's the lead story everywhere. They're running clips from the testimonies, analyzing the evidence. The pressure is building for official investigations. And the pushback started almost immediately, Torres said. Caldwell held an emergency press conference claiming the evidence was fabricated, the testimonies coached. Justice Department spokesperson said they're looking into potential criminal interference with law enforcement operations. Elena absorbed this. As expected, they can't acknowledge the system exists, so they have to discredit the evidence and the witnesses. The team worked through the evening, monitoring reactions, responding to media inquiries through secure channels, preparing for the next phase. Around midnight, Rachel approached Elena privately. "We have a problem," she said, her voice low. "I've been analyzing the viewership data from the stream. There was a targeted attack not to shut it down, but to capture IP addresses of viewers." Elena frowned. "Meaning, they're identifying everyone who watched, creating a database." Rachel's expression was grim, including the families who testified. "Can they be traced?" "Some used our secure connections. Others watched from home networks easily identifiable." Elena considered the implications. They're preparing countermeasures, intimidation of witnesses. Likely. Rachel hesitated. There's something else. The attack originated from inside the department's cybersecurity division, but it used an external server for processing. One I recognize. Explain. It's a server configuration I designed for a private client, not the police. My digital fingerprints are all over it. Understanding dawned. They're using your own methods against us, making it look like you orchestrated both sides. Rachel nodded, her face pale. Setting me up as the fall person? The rogue operative who fabricated evidence and coached witnesses? Elena was silent for a moment, thinking. They need a narrative that explains the evidence without admitting its authenticity. A conspiracy theory is perfect. A disgruntled former contractor manipulating data, creating false records. What do we do? Rachel asked. We adapt. Elena stood. Call the team together. When the group assembled, Elena laid out the situation directly. They're targeting Rachel as the weak link in our chain, the technical expert who could have fabricated digital evidence. We need to protect her and counter their narrative simultaneously. Torres frowned. How? By controlling when and how Rachel is exposed. Elena turned to Rachel. We need you to disappear. What? Rachel looked startled. Not actually disappear. Strategic absence. We arrange for you to be discovered, working from a location of our choosing, with evidence that can't be disputed or dismissed as fabrication. Understanding spread across Rachel's face. The physical records, Dominic's paper trails. Exactly, Elena nodded. They can claim you manipulated digital data, but they can't explain away handwritten records, physical intake forms, paper trails that exist outside their digital systems. Torres looked skeptical. It's risky. If they take her into custody, they won't, Elena interrupted, because she'll be with a very public, very vocal legal team when found. No quiet detention, no opportunity for pressure or coercion. The plan took shape over the next few hours. Rachel would relocate to a hotel under a false name, establishing a visible workspace filled with the physical evidence they'd accumulated, intake forms, handwritten notes from officers, printed emails, and most importantly, the physical logbooks Dominic had smuggled out, showing the pattern of SP-17 classifications. This creates a second front, Elena explained. While they're focusing on discrediting the digital evidence we bring forward, the physical documentation that supports it. Documentation they can't claim was fabricated through hacking. Rachel would appear to be working alone, distanced from Elena, and the others a concerned citizen who had discovered disturbing patterns and was compiling evidence independently. The narrative becomes more complex, Elena continued. Not a single conspiracy, but multiple sources reaching the same conclusions independently. Harder to dismiss, harder to control. The team worked through the night preparing Rachel's workspace with meticulous attention to detail. Every document carefully selected arranged to tell a story even at a glance. A physical timeline created on one wall showing the evolution of the SP-17 classification system. Photographs of the juveniles affected. Hand-drawn diagrams connecting key players. By dawn, they were ready. Rachel gathered her essential equipment, laptop, specialized drives, authentication keys. Once you're in position, maintain communication only through the emergency protocol, Elena instructed. Assume all standard channels are compromised. Rachel nodded. And if they move faster than expected, if they find me before we're ready, the hotel has been chosen carefully. Public spaces, security cameras. No opportunity for a quiet extraction. Elena met her gaze directly. But if something goes wrong, invoke your right to counsel immediately. Say nothing else. We'll have attorneys standing by. As Rachel prepared to leave, she paused. Why me? Why not Dominic or Torres? They have connections to the department too. Elena's expression softened slightly. Because you understand the technology, you can explain the evidence in terms ordinary people will grasp. And because you've already been branded the hacker in their narrative. We're not fighting that label, we're redefining it. Rachel nodded, a new determination in her eyes. The whistleblower instead of the conspirator. Exactly. After Rachel left, the team refocused on their next steps. The initial live stream had created momentum, but momentum alone wasn't enough. They needed to maintain pressure, prevent the story from being buried or twisted. We need more voices, Elena decided. Not just the families we've already identified, but others affected by the system. Create a network too large to silence. Torres nodded. I have contacts in community organizations. People who've been documenting police interactions for years just without the framework to understand the pattern. Reach out to them. Carefully. Establish secure communication channels. Dominic, who had been monitoring news coverage, looked up from his screen. Caldwell is scheduled to testify before the city council tomorrow. Closed session, but there will be a public statement afterward. Elena considered this. He'll use it to reinforce their counter-narrative. Frame this as an attack on law enforcement rather than an expose of systemic abuse. Should we respond not directly, let him make his statement. Then we release the next wave of evidence, specifically documentation bearing his signature. Force him to explain his own handwriting, his own approvals. The strategy took shape, not a single dramatic revelation, but a steady, relentless flow of evidence and testimony. Each piece carefully timed to counter the department's attempts at denial or distraction. By mid-morning, the first results of their efforts became visible. 3 more families had come forward independently, sharing stories that echoed those from the livestream. Community organizations in predominantly minority neighborhoods began publishing their own documentation of detention patterns. Legal aid attorneys started reviewing past cases with new understanding. The singularity was becoming a chorus. Elena watched the coverage with grim satisfaction. The system that had operated in shadows for decades was being dragged into the light from multiple directions simultaneously. Each new voice making it harder to dismiss the whole as conspiracy or fabrication. Her secure phone chimed with a message from Rachel in position. Everything prepared. First phase complete. Elena replied with a simple acknowledgement, then turned to Torres. It's time for phase 2. Make the anonymous tip. Torres nodded, picking up a burner phone. The call would go to a specific reporter. They'd identified someone with a reputation for thoroughness and integrity who wouldn't publish without verification. The tip was simple: a whistleblower with evidence about the Boston PD's controversial juvenile processing system was working from room 712 at the Harborview Hotel. The evidence included original documents never before made public. Now they waited. The response came faster than expected. Within 2 hours, the reporter had arrived at the hotel. Within 3, she had met with Rachel, reviewed the physical evidence, and begun the verification process. By late afternoon, the first story appeared online. Exclusive whistleblower reveals physical records of controversial police classification system. The article included photographs of the original documents, intake forms with SP-17, handwritten in the corner logbooks showing patterns of detention and release, signed authorizations for alternative processing procedures. Most significantly, it included Commissioner Caldwell's signature on the original directive establishing the classification system, his handwriting, his approval, undeniable and physical. Elena received confirmation that Rachel was safe. The evidence secured the narrative expanding beyond their control exactly as planned. Then came the unexpected complication. Torres burst into the room, his expression urgent. "We have a problem. New directive just went out on the police channels. All officers ordered to check and report to stations. Full mobilization." Elena frowned. "For what purpose?" "Unknown. But this is not standard procedure. Something's happening." Dominic looked up from his computer. Social media reports of increased police presence in predominantly Latino and Black neighborhoods. Multiple units. Visible presence. Elena's mind raced through possibilities. Show of force intimidation tactic. Possibly, Torres agreed, or preparation for something else. The answer came 30 minutes later when Rachel's emergency contact pinged police at hotel. "Not for me. Mass arrests happening across city, targeting juveniles with prior SP-17 processing, using old records to justify new detentions." Elena stared at the message, cold realization washing over her. "They're cleaning house, detaining everyone who might corroborate our claims." Torres checked his police scanner. Multiple reports coming in, juveniles being picked up for outstanding warrants or probation violations. Mass processing at all stations. "They're panicking," Dominic said, "creating chaos to distract from the evidence." Elena shook her head. "Not just distraction. They're attempting to legitimize the system retroactively. If these juveniles are now officially in the system with formal charges, they can claim the previous processing was just preliminary to these legitimate arrests." "Rewriting history," Torres said grimly. "Exactly," Elena's voice hardened, "and traumatizing these children again in the process." She began issuing directions rapidly. "Contact every legal aid organization in the city. Get attorneys to every precinct. Document everything who's being detained, on what grounds, what paperwork is being processed." To Dominic, "Release everything we have. All of it. No more strategic timing. They've escalated, so do we." To Torres, "Contact your sources in the department. Find officers willing to speak out about the orders they're receiving tonight. Offer anonymity protection, whatever they need." The team sprang into action, the safe house transforming into a crisis response center. Within an hour, they had confirmed at least 40 juveniles detained across the city, all previously processed under SP-17, all now facing formal charges based on the incidents that had supposedly been erased from the system. Elena paced, mind working furiously. This desperate action by the department had created both danger and opportunity. The danger, children being traumatized again, potentially facing actual charges to cover up the previous illegal detentions. The opportunity, the department acting in ways that confirmed everything they'd been exposing. Her secure phone rang Rachel. "They're searching rooms in the hotel," she reported, voice low and urgent. "Not just mine. Multiple rooms. Looking for something specific." "Or someone," Elena said. "Stay where you are. Is the evidence secure?" "Yes. Most already digitized and transmitted to backup locations. Physical documents secured with the reporter." "Good. Maintain position unless directly threatened." After ending the call, Elena turned to find Torres watching her, his expression grave. "What?" she asked. "They're not just looking for Rachel or documents," he said quietly. "The pattern of searches, the neighborhoods they're targeting, they're looking for you too." Elena's eyebrow raised slightly. "I'm not hiding. Not you now. You then." Torres stepped closer, lowering his voice, though they were alone. "Think about it. The neighborhoods, the timing, they're targeting places and people connected to Julian. To what happened 20 years ago? Understanding dawned. They think there's something else, something we haven't released yet. Torres nodded. Something that connects Julian's case directly to Hayes or Caldwell. Something beyond procedural violations. Elena's mind raced. Was there something she had missed? Some connection she hadn't made? Her phone chimed again. A message from an unknown number. Need to meet. Have information about your brother. Not safe over electronic communication. Gabriel Torres. Elena showed the message to Torres. I don't recall you having a first name of Gabriel. Torres frowned. I don't, and I didn't send this. They stared at the message, implications settling between them. A trap, Elena said finally. Almost certainly, Torres agreed. Using my name to establish trust, promising information about Julian to lure you out. Elena reread the message, something tugging at her memory. Gabriel. The name was familiar beyond its biblical origins, but she couldn't place why. Then it hit her. Gabriel Torres, former internal affairs investigator. She looked up at Torres. You mentioned him once. Said he'd left the department after a personal tragedy. Torres's eyes widened with recognition. Yes, his daughter died during a wrongful raid. Wife committed suicide shortly after. He resigned, disappeared. That was 18 years ago, Elena finished. 2 years after Julian. Could there be a connection, or was this simply an elaborate trap using a real name to add credibility? We need to verify, she decided. Without exposing ourselves, Torres nodded. I'll make inquiries, carefully. While Torres worked his contacts, Elena continued coordinating their response to the mass detentions. Legal aid attorneys reported being blocked from access to juveniles at multiple precincts. Families called frantically, unable to locate their children. The chaos was spreading exactly as the department likely intended. An hour later, Torres returned. I've confirmed Gabriel Torres is back in Boston. Arrived 3 days ago. Has been making inquiries about old internal affairs cases, specifically those involving Hayes. Elena considered this. Still could be a setup. They could be using him, tracking him. Possible, Torres agreed, but my source says he came back voluntarily, specifically asked about Julian's case. A decision point. Risk meeting with Gabriel Torres, potentially exposing herself to arrest or worse. Or ignore what might be crucial information about Julian's case. For 20 years, Elena had pursued the truth about what happened to her brother. Every decision, every career move, every relationship sacrificed to that pursuit. She couldn't stop now. Arrange a meeting, she told Torres, but with precautions, multiple layers of verification, escape routes, surveillance of the meeting point beforehand. Torres nodded grimly. And if it is a trap, Elena's expression hardened. Then we use it. Document everything. Let them reveal themselves one more time. As Torres left to make arrangements, Elena returned to her evidence wall. In the center, always Julian's photograph. His eyes, so like her own, seemed to watch her, questioning, waiting. I'm close, she whispered to the image. Whatever happened to you, whatever they did, it won't stay buried much longer. Outside Boston's night deepened, police sirens wailing in distant neighborhoods as the department's desperate cleanup operation continued. But within the safe house, a new determination had taken hold. The final pieces were coming together, moving toward a revelation 20 years in the making. The meeting with Gabriel Torres was set for midnight at an abandoned community center in Dorchester. The building had once hosted after-school programs for neighborhood children, before budget cuts shuttered it 5 years earlier. Now it stood empty, windows boarded, a symbol of institutional neglect. Elena arrived an hour early, accompanied by Torres, her Torres who had insisted on personal security. They entered through a service door, its lock long since broken, and made their way to the former gymnasium. Dust covered the floor, basketball hoops hung askew from the wall's, remnants of community life frozen in decay. Appropriate setting, Elena commented, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. Another system that failed the children it was meant to serve. Torres positioned himself near a side exit, maintaining sight lines to all entrances. My contacts verified Gabriel will come alone, but that doesn't rule out surveillance outside or a team waiting to move once you're both here. Elena nodded, understanding the risks. If it goes wrong, leave without me. Get to Dominic, continue the operation. Torres's expression hardened. That's not the plan. It is now. Elena replied simply. They waited in silence, a tension building with each passing minute. At precisely midnight, a figure appeared in the main doorway, a man in his 50s, gray-haired with the careful movements of someone accustomed to watching his surroundings. Gabriel Torres entered slowly, hands visible, eyes scanning the room until they found Elena. He stopped several yards away, maintaining distance. "Congresswoman Reyes," he said, his voice rough, as if seldom used. "Thank you for coming." "You claim to have information about my brother," Elena replied. "I'm listening." Gabriel glanced at Torres, then back to Elena. "Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" Elena shook her head. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here, in front of my colleague." Gabriel hesitated, then nodded once. "Fair enough. Trust is in short supply these days." He reached slowly into his jacket, telegraphing his movements. "I'm removing a file, not a weapon." Elena watched impassively as he withdrew a thin manila folder. "What is that?" "The real report on Julian Reyes's detention." Gabriel held it without extending it yet. "Not the one you've seen, not the one in official records, the internal affairs investigation that was buried." Elena's heartbeat quickened, but her expression remained neutral. "There was no internal affairs investigation. I requested one. Was denied." "Officially, yes." Gabriel finally held out the folder. "Unofficially, I opened one anyway, against direct orders." Elena looked to Torres, who moved forward cautiously, took the folder, and checked it before handing it to her. She opened it slowly, controlling the tremor that threatened her hands. Inside was a report she'd never seen. Date stamped 2 weeks after Julian's death. Classification internal only. Investigating Officer Gabriel Torres. The contents made her blood run cold. "Hayes falsified the detention report," Gabriel explained as she read. "Julian wasn't combative. Didn't resist. The malfunctioning camera in the holding cell was manually disabled. 6 hours unrecorded, but not undocumented. Hayes had a trainee with him. Officer Mercer. Young still believed in the system, kept personal notes against protocol." Elena found the referenced notes handwritten observations of Julian's detention, the enhanced processing techniques used, the deliberate isolation, the psychological pressure, the threats. Officer Mercer had written, "Subject repeatedly asked for legal representation. Was told he wasn't under arrest, therefore not entitled to counsel. Subject became increasingly distressed, but not combative. Hayes instructed me to document aggressive resistance, regardless of actual behavior." Elena looked up, her eyes burning. "Where is this Officer Mercer now?" Gabriel's expression darkened. "Dead. Car accident 3 months after filing this report. Single vehicle, no witnesses." The implication hung in the air between them. "And you," Elena asked, "why come forward now after 18 years? Gabriel was silent for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of nearly 2 decades of regret. "I believed in the system, believed protecting the department's reputation was part of my job. So I buried the report, classified it, told myself it was one incident, not a pattern." His eyes met hers directly. 2 years later, my daughter was detained during a raid. Wrong address. Officers had bad information, but executed the warrant anyway. She was traumatized by the experience. Started having nightmares, panic attacks. My wife couldn't bear watching her suffer. Took her own life 6 months later. Gabriel's composure cracked slightly. "That's when I realized what I'd done. By staying silent about Julian, about Hayes, about the beginning of what became SP-17, I enabled a system that eventually destroyed my own family. But by then it was too late. The system had grown, become entrenched, protected by people far more powerful than a single internal affairs investigator." Elena absorbed this, emotions warring beneath her controlled exterior. Vindication, rage, grief freshly awakened. "Why should I believe you?" she asked finally. "This could be fabricated, another attempt to discredit our evidence." Gabriel nodded, acknowledging the possibility. "The report contains details about Julian's detention that were never made public, things only he could have told you if he'd lived to do so. And my signature, my badge number. Verifiable." Elena returned to the report, scanning for these details. Found them. Small things. The book Julian had been reading when detained, Crime and Punishment. The copy later lost in processing. The Merit Scholar certificate in his wallet. the Princeton application essay he'd been working on, and something else. Something Julian had told the trainee officer during a moment when Hayes stepped out. "I just want to tell my sister I'm sorry. I should have called her sooner." Elena closed the file, her composure finally cracking. Julian had asked to call her earlier, had been denied, had worried about her even while he himself was suffering. "What do you want?" she asked Gabriel, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "To make amends," he answered simply. "To help end a system I helped create through my silence." Elena studied him, weighing sincerity against the possibility of deception. 20 years of suspicion warred with the desperate need to believe this final piece of Julian's story. "If you're genuine," she said finally, "there's a place for you in this fight. But if this is manipulation, if you're working for them—" "I understand," Gabriel interrupted. "I expect nothing less than complete skepticism. I've earned it." Elena handed the file to Torres. "We'll verify this, every detail. If it checks out, we'll contact you." Gabriel nodded, then reached into his pocket again. "One more thing. The real reason I risk coming back." He produced a small voice recorder. Old technology, practically antique. "After what happened to my family, I became obsessive. Recorded conversations, meetings, anything that might eventually prove what was happening. Most of it was useless. But this," he held up the device. "This is Caldwell from a private meeting 8 years ago, planning the expansion of what would become PRISM." He pressed play. Commissioner Caldwell's voice emerged tinny but unmistakable. "We don't process these people. We process statistics. Clean, efficient, protected by layers of deniability. Hayes's original approach was too hands-on, too personal. This is better, systematic, and when the numbers show success, no one questions the methods." Another voice, unidentified. "And the legal exposure." Caldwell again, "Minimal. No digital records means no pattern to detect. No pattern, no class action, no civil rights case. Just isolated incidents easily dismissed as misunderstandings or individual officer discretion." Gabriel stopped the recording. "There's more. Hours more. Enough to prove this wasn't isolated, wasn't accidental, was deliberate policy designed to criminalize certain populations while maintaining plausible deniability." Elena felt a cold clarity settling over her. This was it. The final connection between Julian's case and the system that had evolved from it. The proof that what happened to her brother wasn't an isolated tragedy, but the beginning of a methodical approach to targeted harassment and trauma. "We'll need the original," she said, "for authentication." Gabriel handed over the recorder without hesitation. "I'm staying at the Westbridge Hotel, room 304. When you've verified, you know where to find me." After he left, Elena and Torres remained in the abandoned gymnasium, examining the materials he'd provided. "Could be genuine," Torres admitted. "The badge numbers, the details of internal procedures from that era, they match what I know." "Or a very sophisticated deception," Elena countered, "using real details to sell a false narrative." "What's your instinct?" Elena thought about the report, about Julian's message to her never delivered, about the pain in Gabriel's eyes when he spoke of his daughter. "That he's telling the truth," she said finally, "but we verify everything before proceeding." They returned to the safe house where Dominic waited with updates on the ongoing situation. The mass detentions had continued throughout the evening, over 60 juveniles now in custody across the city legal aid attorneys, still being blocked from access. "They're creating a crisis to distract from our evidence," Dominic reported. "And it's working. Media coverage is shifting from the SP-17 revelations to the current crime sweep, as they're calling it." Elena considered this. "Then we bring it back. Connect what's happening now directly to what we've been exposing." She laid out Gabriel's materials, the internal affairs report, the voice recordings. "And we use these. If they're authenticated, they provide the through line from Julian's case to the present. 20 years of systematic targeting, evolving but unbroken." Sabernetu. The team worked through the night, verifying details, cross-referencing information, preparing for what would come next. By dawn, they had confirmed enough to proceed with cautious confidence in Gabriel's materials. Elena sent a message to his hotel, arranging a second meeting. This time, he would come to them under careful security protocols designed to ensure he wasn't followed or monitored. The confrontation with Hayes and Caldwell was building toward its climax. 20 years of silence, of hidden trauma, of systemic abuse was about to be fully exposed. Outside Boston awakened to a city-transformed police presence in minority neighborhoods, confused and frightened families, seeking information about detained children, media struggling to make sense of conflicting narratives. And at the center of the storm, Elena Reyes stood ready, Julian's final message echoing in her mind. "I just want to tell my sister I'm sorry." "No, Julian," she whispered to the dawn. "I'm the one who's sorry for taking so long, but I'm here now, and they will all remember your name." Dawn broke over Boston, pale winter light, seeping through clouds heavy with unshed snow. Elena stood at the window of their new location, a community center in Roxbury, its walls adorned with murals painted by local youth. The space had been offered by a community organizer who had heard their live stream, who had recognized in Elena's words echoes of his own community struggles. The last 24 hours had brought both chaos and clarity. The police department's desperate roundup of juveniles had backfired spectacularly, drawing national attention and congressional inquiries. Legal aid attorneys had organized filing emergency motions in multiple courts. The first judges were beginning to demand explanations for the mass detentions. And Gabriel Torres had joined their team, bringing with him 2 decades of accumulated evidence, recordings, notes, internal memos he'd quietly copied before leaving the department 18 years ago. A record of silence finally finding voice. "We're ready," Dominic said, approaching Elena with tablet in hand. "Secure connections established. Backup systems in place. No way they can shut this down completely." Elena nodded, turning from the window. The community center's main room had been transformed overnight. Where folding tables and chairs had once stood, a broadcast station now dominated the space. Multiple cameras positioned for different angles. Lights arranged to illuminate the center area, while leaving the edges in shadow protection for those who needed anonymity. Most striking was the wall behind the main camera position. What had been a blank space was now covered with photographs. Hundreds of them. Young faces, Black, Latino, Asian American. The juveniles processed under SP-17 over the past 20 years. At the center, larger than the others, Julian. "How many families confirmed?" Elena asked. 17 willing to speak on camera," Rachel replied, not looking up from her laptop where she monitored security systems. "Dozens more in the audience showing support. Some will only participate with faces obscured." "And Noah arrived 10 minutes ago with his mother. They're in the preparation room." Elena nodded, satisfaction warming her chest. After his testimony had been cut short by the police raid, Noah had gone into hiding with his family. That he had chosen to return to finish what he started spoke to a courage Elena recognized, the same stubborn determination Julian had possessed. Gabriel Torres approached his posture, still military straight, despite the evident exhaustion in his eyes. "Perimeter is secure. Community volunteers are watching approach routes. Any police movement will be spotted well in advance. And our evidence packages, distributed to 32 news organizations, legal advocacy groups, and congressional offices," Rachel confirmed. "Set to release automatically at noon if we don't enter the cancellation codes. No way to stop it now." Elena surveyed the room, her unlikely coalition of the wounded and the determined. Dominic with his meticulous records, Rachel with her technological expertise, Torres with his law enforcement experience, Gabriel with his long-hidden truths, and beyond them the families, the communities, the children who had been silenced for so long. "Then we begin," she said simply. As the team made final preparations, Elena visited the preparation room where families waited. Some she recognized from the previous broadcast. Others were new, brought forward by the momentum of truth-telling that had begun to sweep through Boston's minority communities. Noah Chen sat with his mother, dressed in a button-down shirt that seemed slightly too large for his slender frame. When he saw Elena, he stood. "You came back," Elena said, genuine warmth in her voice. Noah nodded. "Had to finish what I started." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "My mom says I'm stubborn that way." Mrs. Chen placed a hand on her son's shoulder, her expression a complex mixture of pride and fear. "He insisted, said if no one speaks, nothing changes." Elena recognized the words, echoes of conversations she'd had with Julian years ago. The belief in systems and the power of truth to compel justice. A belief she had lost and found again in this fight. "Thank you," she said simply. "Both of you." She addressed the room at large. "What you're doing today matters. Not just for yourselves, but for every child who comes after you. Every teenager who might be stopped for looking suspicious. Every young person who might be made to feel criminal in their own skin." Elena paused, looking at each face in turn. "They wanted you silent, isolated, convinced that what happened was your fault or an anomaly, or simply the way things are. Today you prove them wrong. Today your voices become one voice too loud to ignore, too powerful to silence." A ripple moved through the room, straightening spines, lifting chins. The transformation from victims to witnesses, from isolated individuals to collective force. "We go live in 20 minutes, Elena concluded. "Take this time to center yourselves. Remember why you're here, what you're fighting for." She returned to the main room where Gabriel waited with a file in his hand. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I've been holding back," he admitted. "A final piece of Julian's story. I wasn't sure if—" He stopped, searching for words. "I wasn't sure if it would cause more pain than healing." Elena took the file, opening it carefully. Inside was a single photograph. Julian in a holding cell, seated on a bench, head bowed, glasses missing. A bruise forming on his left cheekbone. "Security camera image," Gabriel explained. "From before they disabled the recording. The only visual evidence of what happened that night." Elena stared at the photograph, emotion threatening to break through her carefully maintained composure. Julian looked so young, so vulnerable, so unlike the confident, brilliant boy she remembered. "This needs to be seen," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not just for Julian, for all of them." Gabriel nodded. "I thought you might say that." The live stream began precisely at 10 a.m. No countdown this time. No technical preamble. Simply Elena seated before the wall of photographs, her posture straight, her eyes clear and direct. "Yesterday our broadcast was interrupted by a tactical police unit," she began. "Not because we were breaking any law, not because we posed any threat, but because we were speaking truth about a system designed to remain hidden." She gestured to the wall behind her. "These are the faces of that hidden system. Hundreds of juveniles processed under a classification known as SP-17. Children detained not for crimes committed, but for existing while Black, while Latino, while Asian American, while different." Elena's voice remained steady, controlled, but with an undercurrent of conviction that vibrated through each word. "Since our last broadcast, the Boston Police Department has engaged in a desperate attempt to cover its tracks. Mass detentions of juveniles previously processed under SP-17. Fabrication of charges to retroactively justify earlier harassment. Intimidation of families who dared to speak out." She leaned forward slightly. "These actions tell you everything you need to know about the truth of our allegations. An innocent system has no need for cover-ups. A just system has no fear of scrutiny." Elena paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle. "Today we continue what we began yesterday, but with new voices, new evidence, and a new understanding of how deep this systemic corruption extends." The broadcast unfolded over the next 3 hours, a carefully orchestrated symphony of testimony and evidence. Families shared stories not in isolation, but in sequence patterns emerging with unmistakable clarity. Juveniles detained for matching descriptions of suspects, for suspicious behavior that amounted to walking home from school, for aggressive posture when they dared to ask why they were being stopped. Between testimonies, evidence was presented methodically. The PRISM algorithm with its weighted factors targeting minority youth. The internal communications about processing statistics, not populations. The handwritten notes documenting psychological tactics used on detained children. At the 2-hour mark, Gabriel Torres took the seat beside Elena. His testimony, delivered in the measured cadence of a career law enforcement officer, carried devastating weight. "I was complicit," he stated plainly. "As an internal affairs investigator, I saw the beginnings of this system 20 years ago. I documented it. And then, under pressure from superiors, I buried that documentation." Gabriel described how Julian's case had been the prototype, the first implementation of what would become systemic. How Hayes had developed the approach of detention without formal arrest interrogation, without representation trauma, as deliberate tactic. The genius of it, the terrible genius, was that it left no trail, Gabriel explained. No charges meant no court oversight. No digital records meant no pattern to detect. Just isolated incidents easily dismissed as misunderstandings or individual officer discretion. He played portions of his recordings Caldwell and Hayes discussing the evolution of the system, its expansion, its deliberate design to target certain populations while maintaining deniability. But the most powerful moment came when Noah Chen returned to the broadcast. Seated where he had been when the previous live stream was interrupted, he resumed his testimony as if there had been no break. They kept me in that room for 6 hours. He said, his voice quiet but unwavering. Told me I'd go to juvenile detention until I was 18, then adult prison. Said my college chances were over. Said my whole future was gone because I'd found a security flaw and reported it. Noah adjusted his glasses, a nervous gesture, reminiscent of Julian in the photograph Elena now held. When they finally let me call my mom, I was different, like something inside me had broken. I couldn't explain it then, still can't really, just that the world felt unsafe in a new way. He looked directly into the camera. I didn't understand why they treated me like that, what I'd done to deserve it. I kept thinking it was something about me, something I could fix if I just figured out what they wanted. Noah paused, swallowing hard. But now I know it wasn't about me at all. It was about a system designed to make me feel small, feel criminal, feel like I didn't belong. His voice strengthened. But I do belong. We all do. And they don't get to take that away. When Noah finished, the community center fell silent, a moment of collective recognition, of shared pain acknowledged, of isolation transformed into connection. Elena returned to the center position. It was time for the final revelation Julian's story brought full circle. 20 years ago, my brother Julian was detained by Officer Marcus Hayes, now Captain Hayes, she began. Like Noah, he was held for 6 hours without access to legal representation. Like Noah, he was psychologically broken by a system designed to traumatize him. She held up the photograph Gabriel had provided Julian in the holding cell, head bowed. This is the only image that exists of my brother's detention. The security camera was disabled shortly after this was taken. What happened in those hours changed Julian forever. 3 weeks later, he took his own life. Elena's voice remained steady, though her eyes burned with unshed tears. I have spent 20 years seeking answers, seeking justice, not just for Julian, but for every child subjected to this system of targeted trauma. She gestured to the wall of photographs behind her. These faces represent hundreds of stories like Julian's, hundreds of lives forever altered by encounters designed to criminalize their very existence, to make them feel other, less than, unworthy of the protections and dignity our system promises to all. Elena leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. To Commissioner Caldwell, Captain Hayes, and all those who have maintained this system, your time of operating in shadows is over. The children you tried to silence are finding their voices. The truth you tried to bury is rising to the surface. She paused, the camera tight on her face. You broke these children, but you did not destroy them. They are here. They are speaking. And now, finally, the world is listening. As the broadcast continued, something unprecedented began to happen. Social media erupted with new testimonies, individuals who had watched the live stream coming forward with their own experiences. Former detainees, parents, even several former police officers speaking anonymously about procedures they had been instructed to follow. What had begun as Elena's solitary quest had become a chorus, hundreds of voices rising from the shadows, reinforcing each other, creating a tapestry of truth too complex to dismiss, too powerful to ignore. Rachel monitored the response, updating Elena between segments. It's going viral, beyond Boston. Similar patterns being reported in Chicago, Los Angeles, Atlanta. This is becoming national. By hour 3, the live stream had over 4 million concurrent viewers. News networks had begun carrying portions live. Congressional representatives were issuing statements calling for federal investigations. The wall that had protected the system for 20 years was crumbling, not from a single blow, but from thousands of small cracks appearing simultaneously as silence gave way to voice. As the broadcast neared its conclusion, Elena stood before the wall of photographs, Julian's image at the center. We began this journey seeking justice for the silenced, she said. We continue it now with a promise. What happened in darkness will be brought to light. What was whispered in fear will be spoken in strength. The system that erased these children from records cannot erase them from our conscience, our memory, our determined pursuit of change. She looked directly into the camera, her voice firm with conviction. This is not the end. This is just the beginning. The red light on the camera blinked off. The live stream concluded. But the ripples it had created continued to spread outward, gathering force, becoming waves. The first resignation came within hours of the broadcast's conclusion. The Deputy Commissioner for Juvenile Services, a name that had appeared on multiple SP-17 authorizations, announced his immediate departure to spend time with family. No acknowledgement of the allegations. No acceptance of responsibility. Just a hasty exit before the spotlight could focus on his role. By evening, 3 more department officials had followed suit. None mentioned the broadcast directly, but the timing told its own story. Elena and her team monitored these developments from the community center, which had transformed yet again, now a response hub where volunteers coordinated legal aid for detained juveniles, tracked patterns of police response, and documented the growing wave of revelations sweeping through Boston and beyond. This is just the beginning, Torres said, watching news coverage of the latest resignation. The lower ranks will sacrifice themselves first, hoping to contain the damage. Elena nodded. Standard procedure. Protect those at the top by offering up those beneath them. Gabriel, who had remained after the broadcast to assist with analysis of department responses, looked up from his laptop. But it won't work this time. The evidence trail leads too clearly to Caldwell and Hayes. Too many signatures, too many recordings, too many witnesses. Rachel approached with tablet in hand. You need to see this. On screen, a message posted to the internal police bulletin board by a patrol officer screenshot and shared anonymously to social media. It had begun to spread rapidly. I joined this department to protect and serve all citizens. For 6 years, I've been instructed to process certain juveniles under SP-17 protocol. I was told this was for their protection, to keep minor infractions off their permanent records. Today I learned what it really was. I cannot and will not participate in this system any longer. Badge number 4271. Within hours, similar messages appeared. Individual officers, mostly younger, mostly recent academy graduates, breaking ranks. Not mass defection, but significant cracks in the blue wall of silence. It's happening faster than I expected. Gabriel admitted, a note of wonder in his voice. When I was in the department, this kind of internal dissent was unthinkable. Different generation, Torres suggested. Different expectations of accountability. Whatever the reason, the effect was undeniable. By the following morning, the Boston Police Department was in crisis. Scheduled roll calls showing unprecedented absences. Emergency meetings of command staff. The mayor conspicuously silent during the initial revelations, now calling for an independent review of detention procedures. Elena watched these developments with cautious satisfaction. The system was beginning to fracture under the weight of exposed truth. But the core, Caldwell and Hayes, remained protected, insulated by layers of subordinates and institutional loyalty. That changed mid-afternoon when Rachel burst into the strategy room, where Elena was conferring with Gabriel about next steps. Something's happening at headquarters. She reported, tablet displaying live news coverage. Major police presence. Internal affairs vehicles. On screen, Boston Police Headquarters surrounded by department SUVs, lights flashing. Officers in suits entering with document boxes and evidence bags. The news anchor's voice cut through. What sources describe as a surprise internal investigation ordered directly by the State Attorney General's office. Details remain scarce, but we're told this relates to allegations of systematic civil rights violations within the department's juvenile processing procedures. Elena exchanged glances with Gabriel. This was unexpected state-level intervention moving with unusual speed. Someone with influence pushed this, Gabriel said, voicing her thoughts. Federal pressure, perhaps. Or the evidence was simply too compelling to ignore. Elena suggested, though she knew better. Systems protected themselves unless forced to change by overwhelming pressure. That pressure continued to build throughout the day. Community organizations across Boston mobilized demonstrations, not angry protests, but silent, powerful gatherings. Thousands stood outside police precincts holding photographs of juveniles who had been processed under SP-17, parents with pictures of their children, teachers with images of their students, citizens bearing witness to a system that had operated in shadows for too long. By evening, another unexpected development, a junior IT specialist from the police department's technical division approached a reporter outside headquarters. On live television, he explained how he had been instructed to purge certain records to maintain the separate processing system for SP-17 cases to ensure no digital trail connected these detentions. "I didn't understand what I was doing at first," he said, his voice shaking but determined. "When I realized and raised concerns, I was told it was classified procedure approved at the highest levels." He held up his department ID. "I'm speaking now because silence makes me complicit. I won't carry that weight anymore." Within the community center, Elena's team worked around the clock, coordinating with legal aid organizations, documenting new testimonies, maintaining the momentum of revelation and accountability. Rachel monitored digital responses, tracking the spread of their evidence across social media news platforms, legal forums. "It's everywhere now," she reported. "Too dispersed to shut down, too voluminous to discredit." Dominic focused on the families, ensuring those who had testified received support protection guidance through the growing media attention. "They're standing strong," he told Elena, "empowered by being heard finally." Torres and Gabriel maintained connections with their sources within the department, tracking internal responses, identifying potential allies among officers, questioning the system they had served. And Elena held the center, the steady presence toward which all these efforts oriented, the voice that had begun as one and catalyzed thousands. Late that night, as the team finally paused for a brief rest, Noah Chen appeared at the community center with his mother. He carried a small box. "I wanted to bring this," he said, approaching Elena with uncharacteristic shyness. "It's not much, but..." Inside the box, a simple frame containing a photograph of Julian from his student ID, the same image Elena had kept for 20 years. But beside it, Noah had placed his own school photo. Two young men separated by decades but connected by experience, by system, by resistance. "My mom helped me make it," Noah explained. "For the wall." Elena touched the frame emotion, finally breaking through her carefully maintained composure. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say more. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Elena's arm. "You gave my son his voice back," she said simply. "Showed him he wasn't alone." In that moment, the full circle of Elena's 20-year journey became clear. What had begun in isolation, one sister seeking justice for her brother, had expanded to encompass a community. What had been individual trauma had transformed into collective healing. The following morning brought the breakthrough they had been waiting for, an emergency press conference called by the state attorney general. Flanked by FBI officials and Department of Justice representatives, he announced a multi-agency investigation into the Boston Police Department's juvenile processing procedures. Based on substantial evidence brought to light by concerned citizens, he stated, carefully avoiding direct reference to Elena or the live stream, "We have reason to believe systematic civil rights violations have occurred within the department's handling of juvenile detentions, particularly those classified under the designation SP-17. The most significant part came at the end. As part of this investigation, Commissioner Robert Caldwell and Captain Marcus Hayes have been placed on administrative leave effective immediately." Within the community center, a cheer erupted from volunteers who had been watching the announcement. The two architects of the system, the men most responsible for Julian's death and the trauma of hundreds of others, were finally facing consequences. But Elena remained measured in her response. Administrative leave was not accountability. Investigation was not justice. The system had protected itself for 20 years. It would not surrender easily now. Her caution proved warranted when that afternoon, Commissioner Caldwell held his own press conference from his attorney's office. Impeccably dressed, silver hair perfectly styled, he projected the same confident authority he had maintained throughout his career. "These allegations are deeply concerning, and I welcome a full investigation that will undoubtedly clear my name and reputation," he stated smoothly. "Throughout my 30-year career in law enforcement, I have been committed to fair and equal application of the law. The suggestion that I would authorize or condone any system targeting juveniles based on race or ethnicity is not only false but contrary to everything I stand for. He continued with practiced sincerity. What we're seeing is a tragic mischaracterization of legitimate law enforcement procedures designed to protect vulnerable youth from unnecessary entry into the criminal justice system. SP-17 was created precisely to keep minor infractions off young people's permanent records, giving them second chances rather than criminal histories. Elena watched the performance with cold fury. The inversion of truth was breathtaking, claiming a system designed to traumatize had actually been meant to protect, portraying systematic harassment as benevolent intervention. He's good, Gabriel admitted standing beside her, redirecting the narrative, creating plausible deniability. Too late, Elena replied. The evidence doesn't support his story. Too many witnesses contradict it. But he only needs to create enough doubt to avoid criminal charges, Gabriel warned. Enough confusion to allow political allies to shield him. Elena considered this. Caldwell was following the expected playbook: deny, reframe, create alternative explanations. And it might work at least partially. Institutional power had its own gravity, pulling everything back toward the status quo. But something unexpected happened that evening. Captain Hayes, who had remained silent since being placed on leave, issued a brief statement through his attorney. Instead of joining Caldwell's denials, he simply said, I have served the Boston Police Department for 27 years. I have always followed established protocols and chain of command. My actions were authorized at all times by departmental leadership. Not quite throwing Caldwell under the bus, but certainly making clear he wouldn't take the fall alone. The cracks were widening. By the third day after the live stream, the domino effect had accelerated beyond anyone's predictions. 5 more senior officers placed on leave. Internal affairs investigations opened into 17 specific incidents identified during the broadcast. The mayor announcing the formation of a civilian oversight committee for juvenile processing. Most significantly, the first juveniles detained during the desperate roundup being released with all charges dropped. Judges across the city questioning the legitimacy of arrests that seemed suspiciously timed to counter public revelations. Noah Chen's record was among the first officially expunged. All mentions of his detention, removed his probation terminated. Others followed quickly as the legal system, sensing the shifting winds, moved to distance itself from the police department's actions. Community organizations that had fought these battles in isolation for years found themselves suddenly with platforms, with audiences, with influence. Activists who had documented patterns of harassment without understanding the underlying system now connected their knowledge with Elena's revelations, creating a more complete picture of institutional failure. And within the police department itself, the reckoning continued. A young officer badged number 4271, who had posted the first internal message breaking ranks, appeared on local news face, unobscured voice steady. I became a police officer to protect my community, she said. When I realized I was being used to traumatize children who look like my younger brothers, I couldn't stay silent. This isn't about attacking police. It's about making us worthy of the trust we're asking communities to place in us. The most powerful moment came unexpectedly. A veteran officer approaching retirement age appeared at one of the silent demonstrations outside a precinct, not to disperse it, but to join it. In full uniform, he walked to the center of the gathered crowd, removed his badge, and knelt. I've spent 30 years telling myself I was one of the good ones, he said, voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering. That by not actively participating in the worst behaviors, I was somehow innocent. I was wrong. My silence made me complicit. He stood facing the precinct building where his colleagues watched from windows. Today I'm relearning what it means to protect and serve. It starts with this. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, the Miranda rights warning every officer carried. You have the right to remain silent, he read, but I don't have the right to silence you. The moment captured on dozens of cell phones spread across social media with the hashtag no longer silent. Within hours, similar scenes played out at precincts across the city. Not mass defections, the majority of officers remained loyal to the department, but enough to create visible, undeniable cracks in the blue wall. Elena watched these developments with a complex mixture of emotions. Satisfaction at seeing accountability begin to take root. Frustration at the slow pace of institutional change. And beneath it all, a grief that nothing, no amount of justice or vindication could bring Julian back or heal the wound of his absence. On the fourth day, as Elena worked with legal advocates, preparing testimonies for the now inevitable congressional hearings, Gabriel Torres approached with news. Hayes is talking, he said without preamble. Full cooperation with state investigators in exchange for immunity. Elena's breath caught. About Caldwell. Gabriel nodded. And beyond. The origins of SP-17. The evolution into PRISM. The federal grants that funded it. The statistics manipulated to justify its expansion. And Julian. Elena asked the question that had driven her for 20 years. Gabriel's expression softened. Yes, he's providing details about that night, confirming what we already knew from the suppressed internal affairs report, but with his direct testimony, it becomes more than historical record, Elena finished. It becomes evidence in a current investigation. The implications settled between them. After 2 decades, Julian's case would finally receive the scrutiny it deserved, not as an isolated tragedy, but as the beginning of a systemic failure that had harmed hundreds of children. Later that day, Commissioner Caldwell resigned effective immediately. His statement made no admission of wrongdoing, cited only health concerns and the best interests of the department. But the timing immediately following news of Hayes's cooperation told the real story. The architects of the system that had broken Julian, that had traumatized Noah, that had silenced generations of minority youth, were finally facing consequences. Not complete justice, perhaps institutional power, still provided shields unavailable to ordinary citizens, but the beginning of accountability. That evening, Elena visited Julian's grave for the first time in years. She had avoided it, finding no comfort in the cold stone that could never capture his brilliant mind, his quick laugh, his dreams for the future. But today felt different. She placed fresh flowers against the headstone, then sat on the cold ground beside it. "We did it, Julian," she said softly. "They can't hide anymore. Can't pretend it didn't happen. Can't silence the others like they silenced you." Elena traced his name carved in granite. "I still write you letters, you know, every birthday, telling you about my life, my work, how much I miss you." A cold wind rustled the trees overhead, carrying the first flakes of new snow. "I used to think justice meant punishment, seeing Hayes and Caldwell suffer like you suffered. But now I understand it differently. Justice is truth exposed, silence broken. Systems change so no other child experiences what you did." Elena sat in the gathering twilight, speaking to her brother as she had in her heart for 20 years, sharing the victories of the past days, the children whose records had been expunged, the families finding healing in collective voice, the communities beginning to rebuild trust in institutions that had failed them. When she finally rose to leave, the snow was falling steadily, covering the cemetery in a blanket of white. Elena brushed flakes from the headstone, revealing Julian's name one last time before turning away. "No more silence," she whispered. "I promise." 1 month after the live stream, Elena stood before a different audience. No cameras this time. No evidence wall. No testimonies broadcast to millions. Just 30 teenagers gathered in what had once been an abandoned library building in Dorchester, now repurposed as the Community Justice Center. The space Elena had established with funds from her congressional office and donations from organizations galvanized by the revelations about SP-17. "This isn't about forgetting what happened," she told the young people seated before her. "It's about ensuring it defines your future on your terms, not theirs." The teenagers, all former subjects of SP-17 processing, watched with varying degrees of engagement. Some leaned forward eager. Others maintained the wary distance of those who had learned not to trust authority figures. Noah Chen sat in the front row, already a leader among his peers, despite his natural quietness. Beside him, 2 younger boys who looked to him with obvious respect. "The system wanted you invisible," Elena continued. "Wanted your experiences erased from official records. Wanted your trauma to isolate you, silence you, diminish you." She gestured to the space around them, walls lined with books donated by community members, computers for homework, and research meeting rooms for counseling and legal aid. "This center exists to reverse that intention, to make your voices heard, to transform isolation into community, to ensure that what was meant to break you becomes instead the foundation for something stronger." Over the past month, as the investigations into the Boston PD continued and the institutional reckoning spread to departments nationwide, Elena had redirected her energy from exposure to healing. The truth had been revealed. Now came the harder work of repair. The Community Justice Center offered legal support for juveniles still navigating the system, educational resources for those whose academic progress had been disrupted by detentions, psychological counseling for trauma, but most importantly, it provided space for connection for children who had believed their experiences unique to discover they were part of a larger pattern and therefore not alone. After the formal presentation, as the teenagers broke into smaller groups for workshops, a young girl approached Elena hesitantly. "My brother was processed under SP-17 3 years ago," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't talk much anymore. Doesn't leave the house some days." Elena nodded, recognizing the description of trauma's aftermath. "Would he consider coming here, meeting others who understand?" The girl shrugged. "Maybe, if he knew it would help." "Tell him Noah will be here," Elena suggested. "Noah was where your brother is now. He found his way back." As the girl walked away, Noah appeared at Elena's side. "She's Maria's sister," he explained. "Carlos has it bad. Panic attacks at school. Dropped out last semester." "You know him?" Noah nodded. "We're building a network. Finding the others who were processed, letting them know they're not alone." Pride swelled in Elena's chest. This was healing in action, those who had begun to recover, reaching back to help others still struggling. The isolation the system had intentionally created being systematically dismantled by its own survivors. Later that afternoon, as the center emptied, Elena met with her core team. The months since the live stream had transformed them too. Dominic had left his position at the records department, now directing the center's legal advocacy program. Rachel had established a technical education initiative teaching teenagers like Noah to use their skills for community benefit. Torres and Gabriel worked with reform-minded officers within the department, building bridges between police and communities long alienated from them. "The congressional hearings begin next week," Elena reminded them. "We'll all need to testify about what we found, how the system operated." Gabriel nodded. "Hayes's cooperation has opened doors we never expected. Federal investigators have identified similar programs in 12 other cities." "And Julian's case?" Elena asked the question that still arose in every conversation. "The review board meets tomorrow," Torres replied. "With Hayes's testimony and the internal affairs report, they have clear evidence of procedural violations, falsified records, and civil rights infringements." It wasn't prosecution. The statute of limitations had long expired for most potential charges related to Julian's detention. But it was official recognition of wrongdoing, acknowledgement of the truth Elena had sought for 20 years. As the meeting concluded, a custodian entered with mail for Elena. Among the letters was an official envelope from the Boston Police Department. She opened it with steady hands. Inside, a formal apology for the handling of Julian Reyes's case, acknowledgement of procedural violations that contributed to his psychological distress and subsequent death, confirmation that his record had been posthumously expunged of all references to resistance or noncompliance, and at the bottom a personal note from the interim commissioner. "No words can address the loss you and your family suffered. No institutional apology can heal such wounds. But please know that your brother's case has become the foundation for fundamental reforms in how we approach juvenile interactions. His name will be remembered not as a statistic, but as the catalyst for necessary change." Elena folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket. Not an ending, nothing could truly end the story that began with Julian's death. But perhaps a turning point. Official recognition of what she had always known: Julian had been broken by a system designed to break him. That evening, Elena visited the wall of photographs now permanently installed in the center's main hall. Julian's image at its heart, surrounded by hundreds of others, some who had testified, some who remained anonymous, all connected by shared experience. A few weeks earlier, Noah had suggested adding something to the installation. Beneath each photograph now hung a small plaque. Not with names, many still needed their privacy protected, but with words. Words the young people had chosen to define themselves, to replace the labels the system had imposed upon them. Julian's plaque, selected by Elena, read simply, "Scholar, brother, catalyst. Noah's programmer, problem solver, voice." Others ranged from aspirational, future doctor, to defiant, not what they called me, to powerfully simple, still here. As Elena studied the wall, Noah joined her, standing quietly at her side. My mom says I seem more like myself lately, he said after a moment. More like I was before. Everything. Elena nodded. Healing isn't linear. Some days will still be hard. I know. Noah adjusted his glasses, a gesture that always reminded Elena of Julian. But the difference is now I understand it wasn't about me. What they did, it wasn't because of who I am. It was because of who they are. The wisdom in his words, the profound shift from internalized shame to external understanding struck Elena deeply. This was the transformation the system had never anticipated when it targeted children like Noah, like Julian. That in connecting them and bringing their experiences into light, it would create not victims, but advocates. Not silence, but voice. There's something I've been meaning to ask you, Noah continued. The coding class I'm starting for the younger kids. Would you, would you mind if we called it the Julian Reyes program, since he was into books and learning and stuff? Emotion tightened Elena's throat. He would have liked that very much, she managed finally. Noah smiled, a real smile, not the guarded expression he had worn when they first met. Cool. We start next week. Some of the kids are really excited. As Noah walked away to join friends waiting by the door, Elena remained before the wall of photographs. 20 years ago, Julian's death had left her with a wound that seemed unhealable, a silence that seemed unbreakable. Now that silence had been transformed into hundreds of voices, the isolation into community, the darkness into light. Outside the center, Boston continued its slow process of reckoning and reform. The investigations expanded. Accountability took root in institutions long resistant to change. Communities began the delicate work of rebuilding trust with a department that had systematically betrayed them. None of it would bring Julian back. None of it would erase the trauma inflicted on Noah and hundreds like him. But it created something new from that pain, a foundation for change more durable than any system built on silence and fear. Elena touched Julian's photograph one last time before turning away. In her office waited preparation materials for the congressional testimony. In her inbox, messages from departments across the country seeking guidance on reform. In the center's meeting rooms, young people finding their voices after being silenced. The work continued. The healing continued. The transformation continued. And where there had been silence now arose a chorus too powerful to ignore, too unified to silence, too determined to defeat. A voice from the shadows becoming light,